Hi everybody, Matt Bull here with another episode of the Business Spotlight, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Ross Baglin, who is CEO of Interface Polymers based here in Loughborough. How are you today, Ross?
Very good, thank you. Enjoying the summer weather for a change.
I know it's trying its best. It's trying its best, isn't it? Right, before we get started, could you just give everybody a quick overview of your current role and what Interface Polymers does?
Okay, so yeah, I'm the chief executive of Interface Polymers. We're a chemistry company, and it was an invention in 2016 at Warwick University. You can get very technical, but in very simple terms, a lot of polymers don't like to talk to each other or connect to each other. If you've ever tried to paint a melamine cupboard with paint, you'll find that it turns into bubbles very quickly. So our product is capable of making polymers that don't want to stick together. And out of that can flow probably 100 different applications. The biggest one right now is to make plastics that we can't recycle together recyclable. So that's the core of it.
Amazing, amazing. Now, our viewers will detect the accent. We were just talking about that and the cricket. If I understand correctly, Melbourne, is that the...
That's correct.
Yep.
Good research.
Just talk us through how you ended up. I suppose you're in London at the moment, but how you ended up in the UK.
Yeah. So I did psychology and statistics. I did a joint arts, what was called in those days, joint arts science degree. So I did psychology and statistics. I joined Shell in Australia, the Shell Oil Company, back in 1985, a very long time ago, which dates me somewhat. I joined because I had a psychology and statistics degree. I joined in human resources for Shell, and I worked there for about 6 years, and then they transferred me to a commercial job over in London, basically doing contracts for gas out of the North Sea. So that was classic Shell: pick you up and drop you in a deeply unfamiliar space and expect you to swim. That was actually one of the most trying jobs I've ever done, just the difficulty of grasping a completely different industry, but not bad training for some of what I'm doing now. Spent about 3 or 4 years in London, went back to Australia, back to a corporate planning job with Shell. So very involved with finance, business planning, strategy for Shell Australia back in Australia. At the end of that, they transferred me over to Shell Chemicals back in London, and I've been here for 30 years. I spent another 12 years in Shell Chemicals in a mix of, strangely, commercial and human resources job, very unusual profile. People tend to sit in one or the other. Then I was based in The Hague with Shell in the Netherlands for about 4 years. Decided for family reasons that wasn't going to keep working, but those were where the jobs were at the time at my level in Shell. So I did something remarkable and went and joined the civil service in Whitehall for a year as a director in the Department of Health. The fact that I lasted a year probably tells you something about it. It was a very hard cultural shift and didn't work for me. Lots of great people, but just a totally different industry, very, very, challenging thing to do. And so somebody in Shell picked me up and said, how about going to a job as an executive vice president of a company called Infinium, which is a Shell ExxonMobil joint venture. Nobody's heard of it. Nobody knows what it is, but its products are in about a third of the world's engines. It makes lubricants, essentially lubricant additives. So it's actually startlingly large. Is that fair? It's big anyway. But nobody knows it because it's very much a business-to-business brand that sells specialty chemicals into lubricant companies. Retired from there 4 years ago. Thought I'd done enough, and I was done with corporate life, so that was fine. And then about 2 years ago, a colleague who I'd worked for at Infinium said, would you be prepared to come back and be CEO of Interface Polymers? I won't go into the details of all that, but it was just the right time. I'd been retired for 2 years, got bored, and thought this sounds interesting. So that's when I took it on back in February 21. At Interface. Yep.
So a fascinating career with lots of experience, of which the time we've got together today probably isn't enough. I think what our viewers would be interested in is I suppose the experience and the varied sectors that you've worked in, I suppose, within Shell. So whether you mentioned finance, you mentioned HR and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think is the most relevant now to what you're trying to do with Interface Polymers? You know, this sort of high growth startup organization. What are those sort of skills or experiences that you can sort of pick out and say, actually, this is really relevant now to this business of this size?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenging thing about stepping up to being a CEO, which I hadn't been before this job, is, of course, you know, it's not it's easy to see. It's the fact that you've got to be responsible for everything, ranging from and in a startup, it's really everything, stuff that you never have to worry about in Shell, like raising capital. You know, it's not hard to find shareholders in Shell, but if you're a startup, you've got to raise capital. You've got to, you know, understand the technology. You've got to be responsible for finance, for the HR stuff, the people stuff that's there. You've got, you know, everything from the manufacturing, the R&D, etc. So it's understanding the totality of that. Shell's was a very good proving ground, partly because, yeah, it had this philosophy. Increasingly, it doesn't do it now for better or for worse. It had this philosophy of making you do different things. So, you know, my experience I worked in Shell retail. I worked in Shell upstream, producing natural gas, worked selling it as well as being human resources for it. I also looked after the R&D function from a human resources point of view at Shell, all of the Shell global R&D function for a while. So things like that are, you know, that diversity and range of exposure that you have, you know, gave me a pretty good chance of surviving on making that rather unexpected and unusual step up, probably from having spent my previous 7-8 years at Infinium was essentially global human resources director on the executive team. So I was exposed to everything. That experience too is very helpful to be, you know, if you've sat on an executive team at a global business for 8 years, you get a very thorough grounding in all, what does finance do? What does supply chain do? What does procurement have to do? And how does that relate to supply chain? How does that fit with manufacturing? How does that fit with, you know, product development and launch, you know, all those things, as well as, you know, people, finance, legal, IP. So, and being in a startup, especially a startup that is trying to be, you know, get big in a big industry like chemicals, that range and diversity of experience and having familiarity with that before you step into a CEO role is a pretty good idea.
And what have you, I suppose, what have you learned about yourself since you've been involved with Interface? Because as you say, it's as much for all the experience. It's only when you get in there and start trying to raise the capital and you've got the ownership of everything then, haven't you? You know, it does definitely something. What have you learned about yourself in the last few years, Ross?
Oh, goodness. I mean, when I was asked to take it on, my predecessor had been the chief executive of Infinium, a very large business. And I'd worked for Dominique Fournier, who was my predecessor in this job now. And he, as I said, had been the CEO of Infinium. So I worked for him at Infinium as my chief executive. So when he said, would I take it on? I said, oh, you know, goodness, Dom, I don't think I have the technical background to do a job in chemistry. I'm not a chemist. I don't, you know, I don't have, I've been around the world of polymers for many years in Shell Chemicals, but I don't have a deep background in that. So, you know, the first thing is self-doubt's a really good thing. On the other hand, it can easily stop you from taking things on, and being afraid of failure is never a sensible appreciation of the risk of failure is a good idea. Fear of failure is a bad idea, put it that way. So yeah, I've certainly learned that I think I can do the job. It's now 2 and a bit years on. We've raised the amount of capital that we needed. And the other thing I've learned about myself is that I still have an awfully long way to go. I find out things every day about what the product does, what it can do. One of the nice things about being 60 odd, which is where I am, is and in a startup and at the end of your career is the career fear leaves you a lot as well. The feeling that you have something to prove, or that you're terrified of making a mistake or admitting you don't know something, that stuff leaves you. I wouldn't have had them. I don't know if it's maturity. It's probably I wouldn't have had the same shell-backed, tortoise sense of shell-back, not corporate shell, not company shell, I wouldn't have had the same sort of comfort level about just admitting what I don't know. Certainly way over the CEO as hero idea. My job's just to be a bit of an orchestra conductor, to pull people together to try and ask the fairly obvious questions. So, I think what I've learned probably is the value of just being relaxed. You can be driving without being. You can drive towards results without being overdriving of yourself and others, which is probably what if I had a management failing when I was 40, that would have been probably where it might have been. There were probably others, but
yeah. I think a lot of business owners watching this who are at that earlier stages, and they are trying to wear all those hats, kind of think it all depends on them. So it's fascinating that that's something that you can observe with your own experience.
At the risk of editorializing quickly, Matt, I mean, I'm a great believer. There's one book called Drive by a guy called Daniel Pink. You may have seen it or not. And it's become I won't say it's a Bible, because you should never have one, or an absolute reference text, because you should never have one club in your bag. But and he says there's three things really that people will work for. Three reasons. They work for purpose, a sense that what they're doing is making a difference to something they care about. They work for autonomy, which is the ability to be free and express their individuality, and be free to make decisions about how they control their workspace, wherever the boundaries of that workspace are, but give them enough freedom to play in. And the last one is mastery. People work to have a sense of a pride in a skill that they can bring to the workplace, whatever that is. So, purpose, autonomy, mastery. I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe I think I'm working for something I care about. Autonomy, I'm treated like a free agent and an individual with some ability to express myself through my work. And mastery, which is I'm valued because of the skill that I bring, whatever that is, at whatever level. Great believer in that. And I think for any startup, just if you can think about it in those terms when you deal with your people, I think people and startups are a great place to express that. Corporations suck that out of you. They suck out autonomy. They suck out purpose. They might have purpose and vision statements, but most of us that have worked in big corps, I used to say at Shell takes great people at 35 and can turn them average by 42 if it's not careful. And startups, I think, actually can do the opposite. Sometimes you take average people and make them great, because they're a place where you can express purpose, autonomy, and mastery, because there's not enough, there's enough freedom to move and enough self-assembly and self-creation in them. Anyway, sorry, I'm not. That's a download, but it's a
it's absolutely it's a great observation and great lesson for people watching there. So for me, just on that people bit, because I said to you that I was fascinated. It's one of the key challenges we see. I mean, up in Loughborough, we've got some relationships with very similar businesses to your own, and this idea of the people challenge, finding great people, keeping hold of great people. How are you guys overcoming that at the moment?
And I think it does tap into those. I think there's a few things. One is that, I mean, clearly it helps when you make progress. When people can see that they're on a ship or a train that's going somewhere, it clearly helps. So finding wins and being able, having in your head milestones that are achievable, so that everybody on the bus feels like they can see you making progress towards a goal. So that's a key thing for us, and we've, I think, been lucky with that. It does tap into that point about making the most of what a startup offers. It doesn't necessarily pay as well as a big corporate, but then again, most days our people can turn up, and it's almost like we say, not quite do what you please, but what we're trying to achieve. You're the expert. You help us to achieve in your space what we're looking for, and then help us move forward. And we talk about that. So that I think has been just pivotal to us. We've lost one, I think, resignation in the last couple of years. Now, we're not a big organization. We're 12 or 13 people, but every one of those people is crucial, because when you're only 12 or 13, You know, it's something like Shell, somebody leaves and the waves just close over, and 5 minutes later there's always enough people. But a startup, it's critical that you hold your people. So we've lost one of the 13 in the last couple of years. And as I say, and you know, we've hired new people and we've been successful in integrating them. And so it really comes down to leveraging your strengths. As a startup, people can be defining, and they know that they're defining about whether the business succeeds or not. Nobody in a corporation usually can feel that. So I think that's a key thing. The challenge for us now is moving from, doughty little startup to scale up, because we're really going through that. We raised a significant amount of money in the first quarter this year. We've got a pilot plant coming on. We really are now going through the curve of, it went from when you come in every day, do what makes sense, and we all talk every day anyway, because we're small enough to do that. So if it doesn't look like it's making sense, people will self-correct to some extent. We're now having to probably go through that step of saying, well, let's codify the roles and responsibility of who's doing what. Because when you've got 17 or 18 people in a very fast moving environment, people can start to fall over each other in a way that 8 or 9 don't. The communication can get slipperier. So yeah, I mean, keeping people, we've been lucky. I think we've also had some luck along the way. I think we've attracted some really good people, and recruitment's always a risk. But the core of it is people need to believe in what they're doing and see progress happening in the business, feel that they're getting there. It doesn't hurt that we're still at a scale where we offer people stock as part of the deal, and people can see the possibility of that they feel like mini entrepreneurs and owners. That makes a difference. Not many of us have that luxury in life either.
Yeah. It's an amazing just observation. That's an amazing mindset to instill within an organization, that sense of purpose that pulls everybody forward. So once that is there, that freedom for people to express themselves and commit to the strategy, it almost becomes self-fulfilling. And I think there's a lot that smaller businesses and startups in any sector can learn from there. So
I actually think even big corporates could do way better. I used to bang on about this at Infinium, about if people really understand the company strategy, which means, at the top level, but probably 2 levels up from where they are, what you're trying to do, and then you let them go rather than telling them how to do it, you'd be amazed at the liberation of energy that you get from everybody, I think. And actually the military NATO mission command, is absolutely that philosophy, which is make sure people know, you tell the lieutenant, we need to take that hill, but I'm not going to tell you how to take it because I'm miles away. I'm in an executive role. I'm a general for, 20 miles away, and I'm not there. It's up to you to work that out. That philosophy you can cascade right down your organization, even in a big company. In a small company, actually, it's easier, but that's still the model of, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I'm just going to tell you what I want your job to do. You get to work out the rest.
Amazing. You mentioned that great book Drive by Daniel Pink there, and it sounds like from this interview, obviously, ongoing learning and reading is a key part of the way that you choose to operate and how you choose to spend your time. Would that be fair? I mean, how important is ongoing learning and growth for you?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I don't get as much time to read, and to some extent, there's a risk that when you reach my age, you've sort of what you read 5 years ago is what you're still using. But I don't read a lot of management books nowadays. I have my touchstone books are that Drive, and also a book called The Art of Action by a fellow called Stephen Bungay, who worked for Bain and Company worked for one of the big consultancies, can't remember now. The Art of Action is an extremely good book about that idea of mission command. That idea of how do you set goals for people in a way that make it very clear what you're trying to do, but give them lots of freedom about how to get it done. And it's actually easier said than done. So certainly it's a truism. I mean, anybody who stops learning, you start dying, really, don't you? So my learning, though, in the last 2 years has been about the polymers industry, the recycling industry, coatings industry and the technology behind it. So that's where my learnings had to be. So to some extent, it's choose where your learning is required. I'd had a lot of years of management. My real energy in learning and my investment in learning has had to be in the fundamentals of the business, because I guess that's one other last point. Managerialism is all very well, but there's no substitute for really knowing what it is that your product is doing, why it's doing it, and who it's doing it with in terms of customers, suppliers, etc. So
very cool, very cool.
Yep.
Final question I ask everybody, Ross. I'll ask you this as well.
Sure.
What advice would you give 20-year-old Ross?
20-year-old Ross, or older than that, because 20-year-old Ross had no idea. So 20-year-old Ross was playing in a rock band at full time, so that's a different thing. Yeah, gosh, where do you start with that one? Yeah, I mean, I think for 20-year-old, I was still trying to work out what I wanted to do with my life, so that's probably not so straightforward. The big one, I think, would be that you don't have to solve everything yourself. That it's actually fine not to be the smartest person in the room. And 90% of what you are trying to achieve can be achieved by, getting the relationships right, working out what the key is. Everybody has a slightly different thing that they're looking for from work. Your job often as a manager is to work out or even as a colleague, is work out what that thing is that person cares about and what they're looking for from work, and key into that with your own needs. So, some people want self-esteem from work. Some people want quietude so they can get on with doing what they need. Some people want interaction. Some people want, learning, self-learning, it's all sorts of different things. So understanding what can I bring to their needs is crucial. The last thing that, I guess I'd add is that I'm a great believer worldly success comes from three things. It comes from, you've got to have the brains, you've got to have people skills, and you've got to have drive. And by drive, I don't mean this stuff. I mean, a desire to get things done and to see what you do press out into the world rather than sit in a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint chart or whatever. Balancing those three, drive, thinking, and people, and trying to keep those in balance, I think is crucial, because if you overstress the drive, you'll lose the people. If you overstress the relationships, you'll lose the get it doneness.
Yeah.
It's easy to be too soft on people sometimes, or at least too tactful.
Yeah.
And then the top one, if you overstress the brains, which is a classic thing in a place like Shell, full of super intellects, you overstress the brains, you often lose actually both. You can lose the people dimension of things, and also you can spend so much time thinking about something that you never actually press out and do it. So, brains, people, drive, those are the three. In the middle of that is something like integrity, just behave with honesty and decency and morality, whatever that means, but treat people well, and be honest. As long as you get that balance right, it's simple. It's hard and simple at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to simplify things.
Yes.
Ross, absolute pleasure having you on this episode of Business Spotlight. So many takeaways for our viewers I think of all businesses, all sectors, all sizes. So I thank you for your openness. I thank you for sharing your experience to date. And we wish you every success with Interface Polymers and whatever else you may choose to do.
Enjoyed it, Matt. Thanks a lot.
And many thanks. And I look forward to seeing our viewers on the next episode.
Great. Cheers.
Cheers, Ross. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye now.